Welcome to your rounding decimals tutorial. So let's start with some key vocab. This word here, integer. Integer means any whole number. So for example, 1 is an integer. 21 is an integer. So it's numbers to the left of the decimal point. Below the decimal point, these are parts of a whole. So 1/10, written like that, 1/10 would be written as 0.1. This is not an integer. 0.12 is not an integer because it is not a whole number. When writing decimals or reading decimals, children need to remember to say 0.126. It's not 126. We need to make sure that we say 126. So we've got our hundredths column is in the middle, our tenths column is here, and our thousandths column is here. So we can write this as a fraction as well. So 10 of these would exchange to 1, 100 of these would exchange to 1, and 1,000 of these would exchange to 1. So we've got 1.2126. Children may like to use a place value grid to help them out. So let's begin. Children need to remember to the rhyme 4 or less, let it rest, 5 or more, let it soar. So if a number has 4 or less, depending on what we're rounding, we keep the number the same. If it has 5 or more, we round up. So for example, here it says 7.2. On the number line, use the number line to round the decimals to the nearest whole number. So if I put 7.2 in here, it's asking me to go to the nearest whole number. I can see that there's a 2 in my tenths, 4 or less, let it rest. So I will round to 7. So I know here my nearest whole number is 7. The next one is 14.8. 14.8. And it's asking me to go to the nearest whole number. So because the 8 is bigger than a 5, my nearest whole number is 15. So when we're rounding to the nearest whole number, we look to the right. So when we're rounding, we always look to the column to the right. So for my ones, my nearest column to the right is my tenths. So I'm using my tenths to support me. The next one is 6.5. 6.5. My nearest whole number will be 7 because 5 or more, let it soar. So my nearest whole number is 7. It says at the bottom here, explain to a partner how to round a decimal to the nearest whole number. You can ask your child this. They should say, I will look to the tenths column and I will look to see if 4 or less, it stays the same. 5 or more, I will need to round up. So we're going to go to the next part of the question, and it says, use the number line to round these decimals to the nearest tenth. So it's asking me to keep it as a decimal. My first number is 7.23. 7.23. And you may want to ask your child, how am I going to round this number to the nearest tenth, to this column? They should be able to tell you they need to look to the right. They look to the right here. 3 is 4 or less, let it rest. So this number becomes 7.2. It also says round to the nearest whole number. So they need to go back to their original and they will look to the right. 4 or less, let it rest. 7 is my nearest whole number. B, we are looking at 14.56. So 1/10, 4 ones, a decimal point, 5 tenths, and 6 hundredths. It's asking me to go to the nearest tenth, so I'll look to the 6. 5 or more, let it soar. So my nearest tenth is 14.6. I round up, around this number up. It then says nearest whole number. So now I go back to my original and I will look to the right. 5 or more, let it soar. My nearest number is 15. Whole number is 15. My next sum says 6.45. Once again, it's asking me to go to the nearest tenth. So I will look here. 5 or more, let it soar. We round up to 6.5. 6.5. And then it says to the nearest whole number, I go back to my original, look to the right, 4 or less, let it rest. We keep it at 6. Just do a couple more. So there's no timelines to scaffold now. When rounding to the nearest tenth, how many digits will be there? Will there be after decimal point? Well, I can see here, when rounding to the nearest tenth, there will be one place, one decimal place. And for each of these, it's asking me to round the decimal point to one place. So I know it's asking me to round to a tenth. So this first one is 1.33. So I'm going to round it to 1.3. This next one says 4.03. 4.03. This 4.03 is asking me to go to the nearest tenth. So I look, it's a 3, so I round down. So I will keep it at 0. But when there's a 0 after decimal point, we can just say it's 4. These next sums down here say round each number to the nearest tenth. It's asking me to do the same thing. Nearest tenth and one decimal place is the same thing. So my first one is 4.21. Nearest tenth would be look to my right here. So I round down to my 1. So 4 or less, it stays at 4.2. Number 5 says circle each of these digits, circle each decimal that rounds to 6.2. So I've got, I'll write my numbers out so we can see. My numbers are 6.32, 6.23, 6.27, 6.17, 6.12, 6.25, and it's asking me all the numbers that round to 6.2. So I can look at my first one. This one, I would look to my right. It would round to 6.2. It's not that one. I look to my right. It would round down to 6.2. Yes. This one would round up because the 7 is bigger than 5. So it's not that one. This one would round up. So the 1 will turn into a 2. Yes. 6.12, I look at my 2 and it will round down. So that will become 6.1 like that. So I know it's not that one. And this one here, 5 or more, let it soar, that would become 6.3. So it's not that one. So I've only got 2 that I need to circle, 6.23 and 6.17. It says explain your reasoning. When these questions say explain your reasoning, your child would need to say in the 10 column, I looked to the 10th column and I knew I had to round up or down because. And there you go, your rounding decimals tutorial.